Okay, I think we've all realized that there is one common theme, one common denominator that is beginning to show itself in all of the speeches that we've heard since the beginning, and that is disinformation is real. Minister Alafi, thank you very much for enlightening us, sharing your experiences in terms of how official channels, governments use the tools at their disposal to combat this growing plague. I'm hoping if I could ask the floor managers to actually get the stage ready for the next session. Arkadaşlar bir yardımcı olabilir misiniz? Galiba podyumu kaldırmamız gerekiyor. So we've actually had panel discussions, we've had talks from ministers and ambassadors. We're going to move on to a new format. This is going to be a one-on-one format. I'm hoping that we can get the stage ready. Yes, I see the gentleman. If we can actually, şu podyumu kaldırabilirsek arkadaşlar, 2 tane sandalye ihtiyacımız olacak. Teşekkürler. Yeah, so just like to repeat my reminder that I stated this morning. Besides, in terms of what's going on here, please actually do get a chance to dedicate a little bit of time in terms of the booths that have been set up outside, the experience centers, their artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, robotics. There's a really interesting robot that I'm sure you've spotted, and it all sort of fits into what we're trying to do here. Minister Alafi, I'm going to put you on the spot. My colleague is here from TRT World. We want an interview with you. So if you could actually just spare some time. I'm sorry I had to put you on the spot, but it's important for us, and we do appreciate it. Thank you very much. Arkadaşlar çok teşekkürler. In just a moment, we're going to actually have Associate Professor Kılıç Buğra Kanat, also a good friend of ours over at TRT World. He's going to be interviewing Dr. Nancy Snow, who is the Chief Executive Officer of GPS, Global Persuasion Strategies. And it's a little bit of a personal story, but I'll let Mr. Kanat actually talk to you about it. Arkadaşlar 2 tane koltuk getiriyoruz değil mi? Tamam, okey, süper. Tamam. Mr. Alafi, good luck with the interview. Okay. Sorry for this momentary pause. Okay, like I said, Kılıç Buğra Kanat will be coming up here in just a moment to be interviewing Dr. Nancy Snow, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Global Persuasion Strategies. They're going to be having a one-on-one Stratcom talk, and the title of that is The Gray Zone, Challenging Ourselves. I'm going to be very interested in hearing what they have to say. As you can see, I'm trying to do my best to fill in as we try to get 2 seats up here. I wish I had a little more information, but do we have chairs coming up? Okay, that's great. Has anybody had a chance to talk to any of the panelists if they had any questions in the session so far? Please do, because you're spending a lot, you're dedicating your time to come out here, and if you do have any questions, usually at the end of each session, we try to dedicate a little bit of time to give the mics up on the floor, and it's an opportunity for you to ask questions. We do apologize. We actually really haven't had one because a lot of high-level speakers protocol have been speaking, and That's usually not their style, but hopefully as we sort of progress and get deeper into the Strategic Communication Summit, we will be able to dedicate about 5-10 minutes at the end of each session for you to ask questions. Maybe perhaps Mr. Kanat will actually be able to dedicate a couple of minutes at the end of his session and maybe have questions at the end. We are running a little bit behind schedule. I do apologize for that. And this is usually the way it works in conferences like this. But we'll try to make up time by shortening some of the coffee breaks that we have. We do have a coffee break coming up after this one. And then we'll be continuing into the last section of day one of this Strategic Communication Summit. Mr. Kanat, I do apologize. I think we might be actually having the chairs made for you guys. Oh, it's coming. Is it coming? All right, there we go. I can see it. And I think we also need a set of mics. Or do we actually have hand mics? Yeah, just to sort of speed things up. Let's actually get it center here, kind of looking at each other at 45-degree angles. Yeah, there we go. İki tane mikrofona ihtiyacımız var. İki tane el mikrofonu. Okay, there we go. We'll just do it that way.
Bir tane daha mikrofon.
Olur. We have another one here, Nancy. Here we go. Why don't you take a seat? I'll hand it to you then. Thank you for your patience. Nice to meet you too. There you go. Thank you. Have a good session. Thank you very much for your patience.
Good afternoon, everyone. And after long conversations and keynotes, important keynotes from the dignitaries and from the current situation about misinformation, disinformation, and information warfare, now we will have a conversation with Nancy about her story and her involvement on information warfare, propaganda, public diplomacy, and soft power. She prepared a presentation that has relevance to Turkey as well at certain points. So we will start with her, and then I will continue with soft moderation, asking a few questions to her about her journey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I can't tell you all how excited I am to be here. Part of my story goes back to my father. Now, I will get into that in a moment, but we each have a story. So one of the things I'd like to share today is to think about what your story is coming out of the Stratcom Summit. What makes you who you are? And part of what makes us who we are could be nationality. So here's my US passport. So I'm a US-born citizen, but I identify as a global citizen. I'm a citizen of the world. I don't believe we have a passport for that. And I'm also a resident of Japan. So anyone who's been to Japan, you're welcome to ring me up when you come to Tokyo on your next trip. The foreign minister earlier was talking about how war and peace have really blended together. And it's really hard to tell, are we in a perpetual war versus we haven't had a perpetual peace. So this first slide is showing you War and Peace. It shows the cover, of course, of Tolstoy, one of the older covers. But at one time, we had phases. We had peace, crisis, conflict, three very distinct phases. And countries were fought, or conflicts were fought using mostly military means, i.e. hard power. And adversaries were identifiable. And all the sessions so far have been talking about it's difficult now to separate sometimes the bad actors from the good actors because we're living in this, and I'm talking to you too, but we just talked for a half an hour and it was wonderful. But we're living in this world of the competing narratives. In propaganda research, we often refer to propagandas, propaganda, counter-propaganda. So everybody has a perspective on what's going on. You can go to the next slide. I'll go through these pretty quickly.
Next slide.
So I mentioned my father, and I think it's coming up. I don't know if anybody remembers one of the most iconic ships. I'm not seeing it.
Not yet.
Hasn't been advanced. Who's in control of my PowerPoint?
Bir dahaki slayda geçebilir miyiz?
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, this is the Missouri. That previous slide was showing the iconic ship. This is the connection to my father. Now, I've been in Turkey for 24 hours. My first time, of course, my first time to Istanbul. When I was a little girl growing up, I heard about Istanbul from my father. He was, in fact, on the ship, not during World War II, but during a really undertold story of a diplomatic Mediterranean cruise in the spring of 1946, what we would call peacetime. And the next slide will show what makes the Missouri, in part, so iconic. And this is, of course, MacArthur, but you see, I've got two images here. The Japanese officials. The Missouri was the ship on which Japan signed the end of the war, the unconditional surrender. So when I live in Japan, the Japanese know the Missouri very well. Just to add to the story, it is a battleship, but it's a bit of a diplomat now, too. And I'm writing a book called Battleship Diplomat about the story of the Missouri as in this public diplomacy persuasion role. If you go to Oahu and Honolulu, Pearl Harbor, you've got this sunken Arizona bow to bow with the Missouri. And many, many Japanese come to the Missouri. They were the defeated nation from the Allies in World War II, and yet now we're such close allies. You can advance the slide, thank you.
Bir dahaki slayda geçelim.
Oh, sorry. Oh.
Okay.
Oh, I can advance it. Okay, great.
Okay.
Now, Turkey this is a commemorative stamp from that visit, and I've learned from my very erudite new friend more of the context of this story and how relevant this visit was by the ship. It was a goodwill mission in many respects. Oh, it's me. I'm in control now.
Just to feel something about the battleship Missouri is, when it visited Turkey for the first time in 1946, it was carrying the body of the Turkish ambassador in Washington, D.C., who died during the war times and first buried to Arlington National Cemetery and then brought to Turkey. But there was a geopolitical significance as well. Those are the challenging times for Turkey because of the threat from Soviet Union. So the ship was welcomed not only as a ship that is carrying the body of the Turkish ambassador, but also a ship that could provide a symbolic support maybe for Turkey against the Soviet threat at those times.
I think I've just met my co-author because I've learned so much more from our brief time together. This is an image of my father in the middle, surrounded by the Turkish officials, young men who came out to the ship. You can see a little bit of the Missouri in the background. So indeed, my father told me the story of really the dean of the diplomatic corps in Washington, D.C., Mehmet Erdogan, if I may. And I think it's an extraordinary story. There he is, and I chose this image on purpose because I'm a cat lover, and he was a cat lover too. Many of us who are writers, we love our cats, and we love our dogs too. I love all animals, but I love this image. His son was the co-founder of Atlantic Records, Ahmet Erdogan, who is also much admired. So Those days are gone. Now I'm getting into a little bit of the gray zone in the sense
Those days are gone, but just to add one more thing.
Yeah.
In U.S. Turkish Embassy in Washington, D.C., there has been traditional jazz music nights called Ertegün Nights, right?
Love it.
Almost every month there is a jazz music day. And in the evening, the members of the Congress attended it. It's probably one of the very important soft power and public diplomacy steps of Turkey that has been going on for the last 20, 30 years now.
That's wonderful to hear that context. And I'm reading now a book, I believe, called The Last Sultan, about the life of Ahmet Ertegun. He was very instrumental in making jazz go global, and he worked with great artists like Aretha Franklin. It's an incredible story, and the family is all back together now. And let's see, oh, it's me. I keep, so as I said, those days are gone, and now we're really in the midst of more of this confusion and who can we trust. So I know this is probably a hard slide to look at because the writing is very small, but I'll just share with you, this is US relevant, but it has a global context. So you can see, in following the graph, that in the late 50s, when there were public opinion polls taking about, can you trust the government to do the right thing most of the time? It was in the 70th plus percentile. And now it is in the 20s. And it has dropped to this level through Trump, through Biden. So it's a real bipartisan or even nonpartisan issue. So part of my talk is to address some of these, what I call pillars of persuasion, including credibility, authenticity, trust, truth, trust and truth. And this is a quote from Edward R. Murrow from 1963. He spoke these words before the US Congress. And American traditions and the American ethic require us to be truthful. But the most important reason, he said, is that truth is the best propaganda and lies are the worst. And this latter part is very well known. To be persuasive, we must be believable. To be believable, we must be credible. To be credible, we must be truthful. It is as simple as that. It is a motto that could apply to many journalism institutions. They too are all about credibility. And this is from the Edelman Trust Barometer that was mentioned earlier. And in the 2023 edition of it, it's been around since 2000, so I go to it a lot as a scholar. The conclusion was business is the only global institution viewed as both ethical and competent, while government, media, and social media are distrusted. Of course, that's along a continuum. You may not like social media, and I've heard many people say, I hate social media, including me, I've said that. I hate social media. I don't want to be on social media, but I use it because there is not only an addictive aspect to it, but if you're trying to get a message out, you know, over time with the work that I do, I realize I have to have somewhat of a presence. So I'm on Twitter/X and Facebook and Instagram, but I don't use it to be too provocative. I probably don't use it well, according to influencers. But this alone, I could have put this slide up by itself today, but I wanted to bring in more of the personal story. This is something to really wrap our heads around. And let me go through this. This is, again, some of the questions when you're thinking about confronting bad actors, however identified. Are you in it for the long game? Because the bad actors, the ones who are up to no good, are very much in it for the long game. So we often in this world of strategic communication talk about you can never really sleep. You can't sleep on what your opponents are up to, your enemies are up to. And then I mentioned earlier, is your message credible? Is your message and/or your platform believable? That's somewhat contestable. Both bad actors and good actors use that. Who is trusting you? That's where there is a hybrid advantage, maybe. Hybrid threats really do undermine trust. They don't have to be trusted because their goals are destructive. So really, they don't have the higher bar. I worked for the government for several years and then went into full-time academia. So I came from the State Department and the U.S. Information Agency, which you say, is no more. It's now part of state. They do a lot of work on global media and confronting misinformation and disinformation.
It was the primary tool of United States in public diplomacy for long years.
Indeed, the motto was telling America's story to the world. And when I worked there, I would talk to my colleagues and say, that's just one story. Why is it story? Why not telling America's stories to the world? But they just said, get back to work. So this is a quote from a NATO journal. I'm just going to emphasize the last part about trust building again. It requires sustained efforts at the structural, the policy levels to develop strong links between the state and the people that are underpinned by meaningful transparency, ownership, and inclusiveness. The reason why this quote popped out for me is because I come from a country with a brand where we are seen as so polarized. We are not united. We all may have an opinion about things, but we don't have that national unity. When you lack that, you create then politicians, candidates who are going to address it and say, I'm the answer, I'm the interventionist, I can make the difference. And they may not always have this is my last slide. I added this just now because I wanted to give you all a way to contact me and to go to my website. These are my first 2 books. These are probably the best known, and they're the shortest I ever wrote. But I think that Propaganda Inc., it was telling my experience working at USIA. So I really welcome to hear from you all, nancysnow.com, and on social media, I'm DR Persuasion. So thank you. So we'll open it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for this insightful presentation, and it tells a story, actually, that started with your father, and that's still going on with your trip to Japan and your residence in Japan right now. I want to go back to one of your slides, and in which it says business is more ethical and competent than state and media and social media. This is a rather provocative statement.
Yes.
Because there would be a lot of discussion about businesses acting unethical,
Right.
businesses being not competent or dysfunctional.
Yes.
How would you support that idea if you are behind that statement?
I'm not sure if I'm totally behind it, and I didn't conduct the survey, but I would agree with you. I think we often are distrustful of big media, big business. So when I was in graduate school, it was sort of a requirement in a way when you were working on your PhD in the social sciences to be anti-business or anti-capitalism, and because of all of the undersides of capitalism, and that it doesn't account often for sustainability, and it's the bottom line. But I think what we've seen perhaps is that there is that efficiency quotient. So we often attribute efficiency to getting the job done, whether or not that may be for good, or that may be sort of coming in. Like I was watching on the plane coming over here not a documentary, kind of a fictionalized account called Bezos, if you've seen the film, about the founding of Amazon.com. And I use Amazon, but I have friends who won't use Amazon because they feel very strongly that it decimated the independent bookstores. There's a lot of truth to that, and I have a sentiment for that. But with this communications and information environment, nobody's perfect. We're all very imperfect human beings, aren't we? And we may espouse principles. You may say, yes, business can get the job done, but also I've seen government getting the job done too. So this is more about the perception that people have. And I think that businesses do have customer service. Increasingly, it's gone toward chatbots and artificial intelligence. But I can tell you that if I have a personal connection, if I call, and sometimes I'm known, you know, maybe I'm spending too much time alone, I'll call about something to take care of business-wise, and I'll end up talking to the telemarketer for a half an hour. And it makes a difference having that personal connection. And governments, having worked for the government, even though it was short-term, we were very disconnected often from our clientele, from our customers. Because when I was at State in the U.S. Information Agency, who were our customers? The American people. And yet what we did was really, especially at USIA, was very much cut off from the American people due to legal restrictions. When we were telling America's story, it was to the world. It was not to the American people. So every institution has challenges, but also opportunities. And I wanted to bring it back to this being part of your story. When you mix with each other at the Stratcom Summit, are you mixing as, I'm a journalist, nice to meet you. I'm a writer, nice to meet you. Or I grow flowers, nice to meet you. Our identity and how we introduce ourselves, how we brand ourselves personally, can make a difference in how we then can take that relationship further. Do we get to know that person? Because sometimes we don't understand each other. We see a senior government official. I just met the delightful ambassador, Mexican ambassador, and he's very high level, but he's so, there he is. He's so personable and delightful. That's a memory that I will keep from my long trip to Istanbul. So there again, business, government, media, yes, we can have these images, these sort of perspectives, but it makes a difference, doesn't it? And it's the human relation, it's the human touch. Ultimately, we're living in a world, all this technology, this is how we started out, all this technology at our fingertips, and yet you see young people who feel more disconnected, and older people too, feel more isolated and lonely. So the 21st century makes me kind of want to write a book about the 20th century.
Just before we started, we were talking about soft power index. And in that index, do you see governments that are, in your definition, business-like, and that could touch people and that becomes more successful, not because of their expensive investment on public diplomacy, but more of a personal touch and telling the story of their countries to global audience? Which countries are more successful in that?
You know, that's a good question. I suppose living as I do in Asia, we hear a lot about Singapore as a model, but it's not just business. It is that sort of call that Singapore made that we want the best and brightest. We want the best people we can get, and that's going to be part of our brand identity. So I visited Singapore actually for a nation branding conference and city branding conference. And it is a place where you do feel this sense of efficiency and that things are going to get done. But there is a little bit of lack of maybe the cultural richness. And when I think of a place that we at one time associated very much with business, I'm talking about Japan. Japan Inc. was projected to become the #1 power, really, GDP-wise, by the year 2000. Well, we know that didn't work out.
This is 1970s, 1980s.
Yes, yes. And this was when we weren't hearing about the South Koreas. We weren't hearing about these other up-and-coming countries. South Korea was very much a developing country, but Japan, even up to today, is associated with being an innovator and very modern. That's a very positive image to have. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today was that Japan this year, according to the Nation Branding Index, is #1. And you shared with me the connection between Japan and Turkey from years ago, a century ago, which I wasn't aware of. So do you play to your strengths? Yes. But I do still think in a lot of my work, you will hear the refrain of personal diplomacy, person to person, because that makes all the difference. When I leave the Stratcom Summit, I want to have a whole bucket of stories that I can share about the people I met here. And these are wonderful panels, but sometimes you get it all sort of mixed up in your head, all the data and everything, but the people I don't forget. And then I can share about the need for people to come and visit. By the way, I don't need to be advocating for Istanbul, much less Turkey, because I've been sharing with my friends where I am now, and they say, oh, I love it, have a great time. So it's something that is definitely working well here.
Last question on soft power. You just mentioned how Japan was thought to be the #1 country in 1970s and 1980s, partly because of its cultural influence, partly because of its soft power in those days around the world. And now there is this discussion you mentioned about South Korea achieving that.
Yes.
And we have seen examples that the country's soft power may not overlap with their global influence around the world.
That's right.
Do you think we are, just become a devil's advocate here, do you think we are overrating or the soft power is something overrated?
Well, there's definitely a movement to address that, because I think when you and I were talking earlier, we often make the mistake to separate soft power from hard power, and there's been talk about smart power too. And I believe that the countries with a lot of the hard power, often they have the resources, they also have the notoriety. I mean, people, you know, coming as I do from the US, nobody's neutral about the US, and that has to do with both hard power and soft power. So I've gotten it, you know, for years, post 9/11, you know, Hollywood, but also US military and interventions. And so you have to kind of address that and live with that somewhat.
And now, two more questions. This is more about gray zone, which is supposed to be
Yes.
your main topic. And
That's why I'm wearing
there is this difficulty to understand what gray zone is. There has been discussion what gray zone is not, but there is not much discussion on what gray zone is. What is gray zone?
Okay, I'm a simple gal.
Yeah.
I am updating a book that is sort of the most read book on propaganda, called Propaganda and Persuasion by Garth Jowett and Victoria O'Donnell. And Garth Jowett invited me in as a third author. We're just doing a quick 15-20% edition. But in the book, for years and years, we've talked about types of propaganda: white, black, gray. And gray, in that context, means that you can't necessarily identify the source. That's what we've been talking about, right? Where's the source coming from? When you think of the traditional model of journalism, who, what, when, where, this really came out from Harold Lasswell, who was also a propaganda scholar, you know well. And so it means that, how can I trust? You've been talking about trust, but who can I trust? Well, we trust often the people we come to know. Think of what you share if you're a social media type, and there's a lot of resharing and liking. Well, that's often from people you trust. Or if you don't trust that source, you may have, you know, retweet does not mean endorsement. So it's kind of putting it out there, but it's not black and white. It's not we're the winner and you're the loser. When I think of the US-Japan relationship, they were so defeated. And they were so sort of, they turned it around. I've often asked them, how did you turn this around? How could you work so closely with the US now? But it's that security umbrella. It's part of their constitution. Beyond that, though, I think Japan's soft power country brand has worked well because it has maintained its cultural distinctiveness. And in part, it's sort of a fantasy. Many people who go there, they have Japan on their bucket list. They just want to experience it. And as we talked about earlier, it often exceeds their expectation. It's an interesting dynamic of human beings that if we have this maybe middle of the road expectation, not too high, not too low, and then we're pleasantly surprised, it will reinforce the good things that you experience. And that happens a lot with Japan. That may be a lesson for other countries as well, is do you leave with more of the sense of good, being a good actor in the world? Simon Anholt, who has spoken here, has talked about that, the good country. Are you reliable? Are you a bit of a mediator? Are you a cultural interpreter, translator? So we have different aspects of countries and their people, which is really the brand, the people, that can make the difference for good.
And last question, you showed a actually chart about the declining trust to the government in the United States. And throughout the years, it has been almost constant. There has been decrease, and in the age of this polarization, we have seen that, especially in 2024 election, and during the campaigns, we may see further decline in trust to the government in the United States. But this has been present in multiple different countries. Yeah. And we have seen, especially for democracies in Western Europe and in other countries, which it could be quantified and measured, we have seen this steep decline in terms of trust to the government. What would be the solution? You are a person who has served in the government for the US Information Agency. If you were advising right now, and if you were telling a prescription for a government, how to increase trust from their citizens, what would be your prescription?
Well, I told you already, I'm a simple gal. So I really believe in a lot of, we've seen a lot of the distrust on the rise with some of our legacy media, the New York Times. You'll see various media use this, but I believe in this. I think we need to get back to dialogue, and with those who may have a different point of view. I think we need to humanize each other. And what's happening in the US, I hear it constantly, is that when people board an airplane, or if they get on a train, or if they're waiting in line at the grocery, the chit-chat has been reduced because there is a fear that they may say something that will cause someone to just blow up. That is a real decline element of what's happening in the US. I would like to see that improved. And I think that means a vested interest. Even if we disagree, and we disagree vehemently with each other, which we often do, let's respect the personhood that we live in this world of differing points of view, and that we'll never be entirely, of one mind in many respects. And so it's like I said earlier, was that loss of authenticity, and you have to work at that. So it's not just confronting bad actors, but it's also, we want to create a reservoir for good actors, for good people. Because the good people, I've always believed, outnumber significantly the bad actors. But the bad actors are good at getting attention. And it's usually because it is explosive and it's sensational, and it's like those aspects of media which we say we've had enough of, and yet we can't look away.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and thanks for everyone. And this will be the end of this session.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Nancy will be around for those who are having questions about her presentation or her work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.